process in this country of enacting a balanced budget amendment, sending that amendment out to the states for ratification. That would be the type of process reform that I think the American people agree that we need.
Madam President, I ask my colleagues, Senator Lee from Utah, who just joined us, his late father was a Solicitor General of the United States, law school dean, and we're glad that Senator Lee has really put a lot of effort in drafting a constitutional amendment, the good lawyer that he is, that would make a difference, I think, for our country. Senator Lee, maybe you would share your thoughts about your observation as a new senator on how things are going and why you believe a constitutional amendment, as Senator Wicker from Mississippi has just said, would be helpful for our country and help put us on a sound path for the future.
Madam President, the need has never been greater for us to avoid gimmicks. Gimmickry in this context can have very high stakes and can prove most detrimental to our economy and to the ability of our government to function. We have to look out for those gimmicks that would say, we're going to make a few cuts now, but most of the cuts we're going to propose in return for our ability to raise the debt limit will involve sacrifices by future Congresses. Not the 112th Congress, we'll just make a few. But we'll say that the 113th and the 114th and successive Congresses after that will make the difficult, necessary sacrifices. We can't do that. Nothing allows us to bind a future Congress. That's why we need something that's gimmick-free. That's why we need to amend our law of laws, the U.S. Constitution, to place important, meaningful, permanent restrictions on the ability of Congress to engage in perpetual, reckless deficit spending, of the sort that has produced a national debt now fast approaching $15 trillion, to a degree that is escalating now at a rate in excess of $1.5 trillion every single year. In order to change the problem, we have to change the root causes. We have to change the ability of Congress to exercise its authority that it has so severely abused in recent decades under Clause 2 of Article 1, Section 8, to engage in deficit spending. A balanced budget amendment, the balanced budget amendment that's been endorsed and embraced and co-sponsored by all 47 Republicans in the Senate, will do just that. We've got a growing number of Republicans, a couple dozen, who have now gotten behind the one proposal that would allow us to approach the debt limit with this in mind and would require the balanced budget amendment to be part of that. And I urge my colleagues to support that.
I thank you, Senator Lee, for your leadership and hard work on that. It's not an easy thing to draft something but that people would all agree with. But you've got all, I think the Republicans have signed on to that, you and your colleagues, and we are happy for that. And I believe that this is not an impossible dream. When I came to the Senate in 1997, we had a vote on the balanced budget amendment. It fell one vote short. We had 66. It required 67. How much better off would we have been today? How much less debt would we have placed on our children and grandchildren had that amendment been passed then? So I do think it's time for a national discussion again on this issue and to make that change, and would like to point out something about the debt that we now have. Unemployment rate came in disappointingly with only 18,000 jobs created last month in June. We look to have 150,000 just to stay level. Unemployment went up. Economic growth in the first quarter was expected to be much higher than it came in. It came in, I think the first number was 1.8. Maybe it's been revised to 2%. The Rogoff-Reinhart study that studied debt defaults in countries all over the world for 8 centuries, a highly respected study. Secretary Geithner, the Treasury Secretary, said it's an excellent study, and in some ways it underestimates the risk. This study says that when your debt reaches 90% of the economy, 90% of the gross domestic product, it pulls down economic growth by 1 to 2%. We're now at 95% debt to GDP. We'll be at 100% of debt to GDP by the end of this year. I believe that our growth could have been 3% instead of 2% first quarter. I believe, and 1% growth, according to the Obama White House, Christine Romer, economic advisor, amounts to 1 million jobs created. So I believe we've lost 1 million jobs that could have been created. We've lost additional tax revenue and growth and prosperity that would help us deal with our debt because of the debt. You see, you can't keep borrowing. Maybe when our debt to GDP was 30%, maybe that's what it was when Senator Wicker probably came to Congress. Now we're at 100%. Our debt is as large as the entire productivity of our economy, and economists tell us it's pulling down our growth. And it's costing jobs. And Americans are not working today because of debt. And what we hear is, don't worry about it, deficits really don't matter. Senator Wicker, you've been here in the House and in the Senate. Have you seen the situation in which our financial crisis, short-term and long-term, systemically, is more severe than it is today?
Well, I think, I guess I got to the House in 1995. My friend from Alabama came to the Senate 2 years later. I don't think we could have imagined an annual deficit of $1.5 trillion in one short year. We are spending that much more than we're taking in. In other words, we take in $2.2 trillion a year approximately, and we spend $3.7 trillion a year, a difference of $1.5 trillion. I don't think we ever expected it to get that serious when the senator from Alabama and I first got here. And clearly, there's no way we can turn back the clock, but the senator is correct. If we had enacted with just one more vote in this very body a constitutional amendment to balance the budget, clearly we would not be facing this fiscal crisis. But I want to also make a very important point, and it's what all the papers are talking about, and that's whether somehow a tax increase targeted to deficit reduction is the thing to do. Listen, my friends, Republicans and Democrats over time, until recently, have been united in saying tax increases are a bad thing to do. And I want to ask my colleagues if any of you can help identify the public official who said this quote, "The last thing you want to do is to raise taxes in the middle of a recession because that would take more demand out of the economy and put businesses in a further hole," unquote. Now, would any of my colleagues care to guess, Senator Lee?
That was President Obama in the middle of 2009 who made that comment.
Absolutely. Somehow, the president, who made a very cogent and correct statement in 2009, has completely changed his tune now. We could have a budget deal in place on the floor of the House and Senate and ready to be passed if the President of the United States would simply come back to the position that he took in 2009 and 2010. As late as December of 2010, the President was telling the New York Daily News that we should keep the tax rates in place. The budget chairman in the Senate told Reuters last July, only a year ago, that he supported extending the tax cuts and keeping them in place because to raise taxes on the private sector during a time of economic downturn is taking money out of the private sector and killing their ability to create jobs. So I would simply call on my colleagues from the other side of the aisle to return to the position that they had a year ago and 2 years ago, let's get a budget deal that addresses the debt by cutting spending and be united as we were on that issue some year and 2 years ago.
Senator Johnson, you're, as I recognize, a businessman. President Clinton recently said we need to reduce our corporate tax rate. I was on a TV show with Senator Bill Nelson, my good Democratic colleague, who said we ought to reduce some of these tax expenditures, some call them, on the kind of things that Senator Klobuchar, I think, mentioned. My understanding was that we could use that to help get our rates down so we're more competitive worldwide and create more jobs. Now, I guess my question to you is, if you take the if you simplify the tax code, you eliminate gimmicks, should the money be applied, as President Clinton suggested, to reducing our rates so we're more competitive, or should they be used to subsidize more spending by Washington?
Well, obviously, it makes more sense to actually use them to make us more competitive so that global capital actually flows in the United States to create jobs here. You know, I am a long-term job producer. I certainly recognize it is the private sector that creates long-term self-sustaining jobs. And I'm afraid that's what our colleagues on the other side of the aisle and President Obama simply doesn't understand. And you know, I'm often asked, are you surprised about anything in Washington? I'll tell you one thing I'm not surprised is that their solution is increasing taxes. I mean, let's face it, we just undertook a $4 trillion experiment in Keynesian economics. We're down more than 2 million jobs since that grand experiment began when President Obama became elected. It doesn't work. And now for the Democrats, President Obama is proposing $1 trillion, $2 trillion, or as you point out, as much as $2.8 trillion in new taxes. And what is that? That is actually taking money out of the private sector where real jobs are created. That would be the wrong direction. That would be a big mistake, and that's why Republicans are united in saying increasing taxes at any time, particularly in a weak economy, is the wrong prescription. Getting our debt and deficit and spending under control, a balanced budget amendment, that's the solution. It can actually be enacted very quickly. We don't have to face a crisis that President Obama and Treasury Secretary are trying to whip up here.
Well, Madam President, I would just say that I do believe we are at a national crisis with our debt. I believe that it endangers the nation because the Erskine Bowles, who chaired the Debt Commission appointed by President Obama, has told us that we're facing an economic crisis as a result of the debt in written testimony to the Budget Committee. And he warned that we have to change the course we're on. I certainly believe that's true, and I believe the Rogoff and Reinhart study affirmed by Secretary Geithner is correct, that it's already pulling down our growth. I really am worried about the future of our country. Senator Lee, maybe you'll wrap up for us, but you've just finished a campaign talking to hundreds of thousands of people in your state. What's your perception of what we need to be doing at this point in time?
The American people expect us to stop burying our children and our grandchildren under a mountain of debt, to stop spending money that we don't have, particularly where we're spending about 40 cents out of every dollar that is borrowed, much of that being borrowed from foreign sovereign governments like China. Now, obviously, there are times when, as a country, we've needed to do this, when our circumstances have required it. The reason that Congress was given this power to begin with was to make sure that, particularly in the time of war, Congress had the means at its disposal to provide for our national defense and to provide for other immediate emergent needs. But this practice of what I refer to as perpetual deficit spending has become not just something we do on an emergency basis, not just something we do in time of war or other kind of unusual circumstance. It's become something that we do just as a matter of course, just to keep things moving, just to keep business as usual operating in Washington to the point where we're accumulating over $1.5 trillion a year in new debt. Our constituents in every single state expect more and they deserve better. And the reason for this has everything to do with the fact that this unites people along every point along the political spectrum. Whether you are a conservative and you care about the deficit because you want to protect our national defense system, or because you care deeply about our economy, or whether you're a liberal and you care about the deficit because you're concerned about what this will do to our entitlement programs. All of those things stand in grave jeopardy as a result of this practice of spending, this practice that will result in the United States government having to spend a lot more money every single year just to pay interest on the national debt, interest that doesn't benefit anyone, interest that crowds out private investment and kills jobs. That's what voters in my state and in every state are concerned about.
Thank you, Madam President. And I just would say that the interest factor my colleague mentioned is very, very real. Last year, or this year, we're expected to pay $240 billion on interest. How much is that? That's just a number? Well, the amount of money that we spend under the Federal Highway Program is $40 billion. The amount of money we spend on federal aid to education is $100. So we're paying this year $240 billion. However, under the budget that was submitted to the Congress by the President, the Democratic Senate has never brought one forward of their own, and that budget surged the debt, adding $13 trillion more to the debt, and the Congressional Budget Office, our nonpartisan accountants who are pretty good, they have calculated what the interest payment would be in the 10th year of that 10-year budget. And they have concluded that the interest payment that year would be $940 billion. That's larger than Medicare. That's larger than Medicaid. That's larger than Social Security. That's larger than the defense budget. These numbers are incredibly large. And you cannot, as a gentleman told me at a town hall meeting, borrow your way out of debt. We cannot keep spending. It's dragging down our economic growth right now. It's costing jobs right now. And there are some people that say, well, we didn't have enough jobs, we need to spend more, and where are we going to get that money? Borrow that money. We're already borrowing 40 cents of every dollar we spend. Can we afford to borrow more to try to get a sugar high, keep growth artificially growing now? I think we just have to be mature, grown up, and realize that we're going to have to work our way out of this fix. And we can do it if we create stability and soundness in our economy. If we do this thing right, we can create a system in which we can have growth. Our business community is hanging in there. They're doing pretty well. They're holding up, but we've got to create jobs. We've got to have more job growth and more growth in the entire economy. That's what we need, and I do believe the debt is a weight on us. It's a burden that's reducing the growth, and we must have it to pull our way out of the crisis that we're in. And I'm glad to see that the President has joined in the discussions. But I have to say, and I think he's moved from the budget he submitted just a few months ago, which was the most irresponsible budget ever submitted to Congress, calling for more taxes, more spending, and more debt. In other words, over the period of 10 years his budget laid out, the taxes would go up, the spending would go up more than the taxes, and the deficit would go up more than the current path we're on. It made it worse. We cannot do that. When that budget was brought to the floor, I brought it to the floor, and we got a vote. It failed 97-0. So I'm glad the President is working now. We've got to somehow together develop a strategy to put us on a course that all Americans and the business community in our country, the world financial community will say, boy, the United States is getting their act together. They're making the right decisions. They're on a sound course now. Maybe that's where we need to put our money instead of some other place, because they're on the right path. But right now, it's very dangerous. Madam President, I thank the chair and would yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Illinois. Has consent the quorum call be suspended without objection? And consent to speak as if in morning business. Without objection. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I've been participating in the White House meetings with President Obama and the leaders of the House and Senate from both Democratic and Republican parties for the last several days, discussing the deadline we faced of August 2nd, where we are required to extend the debt ceiling of the United States, and the larger question about what we will do with our nation's deficit and debt. It is a daunting challenge, but one with a sense of immediacy. Most people across America would just react intuitively and say, please, no more debt. And so they really wonder why we want to extend the debt ceiling. It's a part of our government and part of our economy that needs at least a little bit of explanation. Imagine that you have decided to purchase a home and you have a mortgage. To stay in your home and enjoy it, you have to make your monthly mortgage payment. When the time comes, if you don't make your monthly mortgage payment, you run the risk of being pushed out of your home, evicted, foreclosed. That's what we face on August 2nd in a different form. Because if we fail to extend the debt ceiling, we are in fact missing our mortgage payment, and it creates problems. The credit rating of the United States of America will suffer, as the credit rating of any family would suffer if they didn't make a mortgage payment. The likelihood that the United States could borrow more money soon without higher interest rates is diminished. In fact, we would face higher interest rates, our government would, if we didn't extend our debt ceiling. That is not the only problem. Higher interest rates for our government mean more taxes have to be paid by our citizens to finance our debt, and interest rates across America will go up as well. So average citizens and families who had nothing to say with this extension of the debt ceiling are going to face higher interest rates when it comes to purchases that they might make for cars and homes and appliances. So it would be the height of irresponsibility not to extend the debt ceiling. Since 1939, I was told this morning, we have consistently, time after time, extended the debt ceiling of America without fail. We have never defaulted. We have never called into question the full faith and credit of the United States. We have never jeopardized our credit rating in the world by failing to meet this responsibility, and we cannot do it now. With an unemployment rate of 9.2%, with an economy still recovering very slowly, we can't run the risk of creating more unemployment and hurting businesses with higher interest rates. And so we have to do it. At the same time, though, we are embarking on an important strategic national discussion about our deficit and debt. Mr. President, I don't know whether I'm fortunate or unfortunate. For the past year and a half, I've been engaged in this conversation in a much more focused way than any time in my career. I was appointed to be a member of President Obama's Deficit Commission. There are 18 of us. And I have stayed on to work with 5 of my colleagues, 2 Democratic senators and 3 Republican senators, to see if we can come up with a bipartisan approach to deal with a very difficult problem. Let me give you a few facts and a little history that puts it in perspective. Today, for every dollar our government spends in America, we borrow 40 cents. I just left the meeting of the Chinese-American Interparliamentary Union, where members of the Chinese Parliament are just a few steps away. China is our #1 creditor in the world. China loans more money to the United States, buys more of our debt than any other nation. That is worrisome, because China, though it's our largest creditor, is also our largest competitor. Go to your local big box store, flip the product over and see where the products are made. time and time and time again, they're made in China. So this country that is financing our debt is also competing with American producers and workers. It's not a healthy situation. The more dependent we are on these countries to finance our debt, the weaker our economy. So reducing the amount of money that we borrow is in our economic best interest, and it lessens the chance that our children and grandchildren will have to pay off the debts that we incur. Now, what is the status of the debt in America? It's about $14.5 trillion, but it hasn't been at that level before, and it hasn't been at that level for a long time, and it's likely to go up. Just to give you a perspective on this, 10 years ago, just 10 years ago, the national debt of America was $5 trillion. Now it's $14.5 trillion. $5 trillion. It was the end of the Clinton presidency, and as President Clinton left office, we had 3 straight years of federal budget surplus. We were bringing in more in revenue than we were spending. It was a healthy thing because the excess we collected, we put into programs like Social Security to make sure that they'd be there for years and years to come. And President Clinton, as he left office, with a $5 trillion national debt, which was the debt accumulated across the history of America, and surpluses coming in each year, said to the incoming President, George W. Bush, next year's budget is going to generate another surplus, $120 billion. Welcome to Washington. President Bush became president, and now fast forward 8 years later. What happened? The $5 trillion national debt during the Bush administration grew to almost $11 trillion, more than doubled in an 8-year period of time. And instead of leaving President Obama a surplus, President Bush said next year's budget is going to have a $1.2 billion deficit, $1.2 trillion deficit. So the president faced the largest single annual deficit as he came to office, President Obama, and a national debt that had more than doubled in the previous 8 years. How do you double the national debt of America in 8 years? From George Washington until the end of President Clinton, the net national debt of America was $5 trillion. How did it more than double in 8 years? Here's how you do it. You wage 2 wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and you don't pay for them. You add them to the national debt. Then you do something that no president has ever done in the history of the United States. In the middle of a war, with annual deficits, you cut taxes. It's counterintuitive. You're taking revenue away from the government when it needs it to pay for a war and to continue the functions of government. So unpaid for wars and tax cuts, primarily for the wealthy people in America, followed by programs that weren't paid for. You put those 3 together, and you build into it an economic theory that if we just keep cutting taxes on high-income individuals, America will get well. The theory fails, and the debt of America doubles in 8 years. That's what happened. It's fact. Went to $10.5 trillion from 5 in just 8 years. And we know what we've gone through since. People out of work. Folks struggling to get by, businesses struggling. That is a reality of where we are. So when we come together to talk about dealing with this debt, it is a painful topic, and it affects every single American. Here's what we found on the Bowles-Simpson Deficit Commission. Any serious conversation about reducing America's debt requires cutting spending and raising revenue. If you don't do those 2 things, it won't work. And what do you cut? Well, almost everything. You take a look across the board at all federal spending, whether it's discretionary spending for domestic purposes or for defense purposes. You take a look at the entitlement programs, programs like Medicare, Medicaid, veterans, agriculture, and you see where you can save money there, and you look at revenue. Where can you come up with revenue that won't hurt the economic recovery but will help us bring our debt under control? The Deficit Commission came to that conclusion. Other senators have come to that conclusion, and now we are debating it again with the President on a daily basis in the White House. This morning, my colleagues from the Republican side of the aisle came with their solution, at least one of their solutions. It's not a new idea. In fact, it's an idea that's been around a long, long time. It's called a balanced budget constitutional amendment. We first saw the move for a balanced budget constitutional amendment in modern times during President Reagan's presidency. It was interesting. President Reagan increased the debt limit of the United States more than any other president, ran up the highest deficits of any president in history before him, and had this push on to amend the Constitution. It is ironic that at the same time that members of his party were spending the money and plunging us in debt, they said the answer was change the Constitution. Not change their conduct, not change the way they manage the government, but change the Constitution. It's like saying, I won't tell you that I'm going to stop stealing, but I will tell you that I'll vote for the Ten Commandments. It doesn't work. We have it within our power as members of the Senate and the House to change the way we spend money in Washington. To say that we're going to wait for a constitutional amendment to get it done is to submit it to the states and let them see if 3/4 of the states agree that we should amend the Constitution. How long does that take, Mr. President, to amend the Constitution? The last amendment to the Constitution took 203 years before all the states, 3/4 of them, got around to ratifying it. Some of them take much shorter periods of time, but there's no guarantee when the states will get around to doing this if they agree with us on amending the Constitution. So I asked my friends on the Republican side of the aisle, instead of focusing on the Constitution, why don't you focus on the here and now, the authority we have as elected senators and members of the House to do something, not to give speeches and preach about changing our Constitution. I have to tell you, Mr. President, when it comes to this Constitution, I don't address it with fear, but with humility. This is a document which is revered not only in the United States, but around the world. And to say that, well, we're just going to change the Constitution to deal with today's problems, I'm skeptical, and I'm reluctant. And I'm humbled by the fact that those words have created the greatest, strongest democracy on earth. And before we start changing the words of that Constitution, I always say, is there another way to do it? And the answer is yes. Clearly there is. Instead of speeches on the floors about constitutional amendments, why don't we have speeches on the floor talking about the Bipartisan Deficit Commission and what we can do about our debt? Why don't we honestly come together and say everything has to be on the table? Everything, all spending programs, all entitlement programs, all taxes have to be on the table. And let's take an honest look at how we can address them and make this economy strong and moving forward. That is what we face. Now, we've had a bad track record from some members on the other side of the aisle who give speeches about constitutional amendments but don't stick around for the hard choices. We had a chance here to put a bill together into a law that would have made a vote of Congress mandatory on bringing the budget deficit down dramatically. 7 Republican senators who were co-sponsors of that bill when it came to the floor voted against it and defeated it. They walked away from it. We've had conversations here where senators have come together and tried to work out our differences on deficits and come up with a plan. And one group that I've been part of, one of the Republican senators walked away from it, and it basically was put on hold because of that. Vice President Biden was given the authority to sit down in a bipartisan conversation and come up with an approach on the deficit, and the Republican House Majority Leader walked away and said, I'm not going to participate. Just this last week, President Obama was working directly with the Republican House Speaker trying to come up with a plan, and over the weekend the House Speaker said, I'm walking away from it. So the Republican Party has become the walk-away Renee party when it comes to this budget deficit. We've got to keep them in the room. They have to stop theorizing about constitutional amendments down the road, months and years from now, and deal with the here and now. the reality that we need to extend our debt limit, we need to deal with our deficit in an honest way, and we need to put everything, underline everything, on the table. That is painful on our side of the aisle when it comes to entitlement programs. It's painful on their side of the aisle when it comes to taxing those in higher income categories. But until we reach that point, this conversation is going to continue to lead to more debt, more money being borrowed from China, and an economy that is not going to get back on its feet. I think we can do this in a responsible fashion. I hope that we can have a bipartisan approach to it. It is the only way that it will work. With a Republican House and a Democratic Senate, we need a bipartisan approach. We'll be returning this afternoon with the President to deal with this, to work on approaches to it, and I hope that we can get something done in a positive fashion. Senator McConnell this morning, Mr. President, said some interesting things that I would like to address. Senator McConnell is a Republican Senate leader, implied that this debate should be fairly easy. I wish he were right. And that he said the Republicans have been the party that's brought an open mind to these discussions. Well, I don't think that's a fact that can be proven based on what I said earlier. He said the suggestion has been made that this debate was hinged on the question of whether or not the two parties could find a solution to our economic problems without raising taxes. Wrong. We could have done that without breaking a sweat, he said. He added, it's no secret how to solve the entitlement crisis either. Any one of the people involved in these discussions could write it out on the back of an envelope. Perhaps that's part of the challenge here. I know that the Republican approach to Medicare is much different than the Democratic approach. The House Republican budget would have dramatically changed Medicare as we know it. It would have doubled the out-of-pocket expenditures by senior citizens. It would have put the Medicare program in the hands of private health insurance companies. It would have, unfortunately, put many seniors in their 60s, 70s, and 80s at the tender mercies of health insurance adjusters. That is not a good approach to health care for our seniors. The challenges we face are not easy, they're not cosmetic, and they can't be solved just by letting the market, meaning insurance companies, run Medicare. In these negotiations, I believe many Democrats, myself included, are willing to sit down and talk about reductions in government spending, even though I believe in my heart of hearts that our economy needs a stimulus at this point, and reducing spending may be exactly the wrong thing to do. I'm still prepared to sit at the table and find a consensus if we can when it comes to spending cuts. But we shouldn't make this economic challenge be subject to dramatically changing the benefits under Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. These programs are critical for families across America. Some of them have watched their savings disappear, their pension plans evaporate in a bankruptcy court, and they count on Social Security. We've got to be there to make sure Social Security will be there for them. Senator McConnell also wants the Senate and the American people to think the Republicans are negotiating in good faith. He said we showed a willingness to sacrifice all along, even as we made it crystal clear from the outset tax increases would not be part of any agreement. So I have to ask Senator McConnell, what is it that the Republicans are willing to sacrifice in this debate? He went on to say there can be no question by anyone involved in these discussions that we are willing to make tough choices. Again, which tough choices? Right now, we are at a stalemate in our conversations with the President because the Republicans have been unable to come up with an approach that will meet the needs of deficit reduction. So we need to work together. We need to, both sides, be willing to make these tough choices and face these challenges. Unless and until we do this on a bipartisan basis, we will not be serving the people who elected us. It struck me as I sat in that room the other night, the cabinet room, with the President, what a rare honor it is for me and for every one of us in that room to be there, to be entrusted with this responsibility for this great nation of over 300 million people who are counting on us to do something historic and maybe politically bold. I'm prepared to do that. I hope others are as well. I think if we approach it on a bipartisan basis, with both sides willing to give, with everything on the table, we can solve this, and we should do it as quickly as possible. Mr. President?
Can you also let me report the bill after you do that?
I have 6 unanimous consent requests for committees to meet today during the session of the Senate with the approval of the majority and minority leaders, and I ask consent these requests be agreed to and printed in the record.
Without objection. Morning business is closed. Under the previous order, the Senate will resume consideration of S-1323, which the clerk will report.
Calendar number 93, S-1323, a bill to express the sense of the Senate on shared sacrifice in resolving the budget deficit.
Mr. President, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.